and welcome to the DME podcast, brought to you by DME, the podcast booking platform. Whether you're a podcaster or an aspiring guest, the DME app is a perfect platform for you to get booked and manage your podcast bookings. I'm your host, Sukhay, the founder of DME, and on this podcast we'll be discussing the latest news and views in tech, the ins and outs of entrepreneurship, and even dipping our toes into the adrenaline-filled world of mixed martial arts. On this week's episode, we continue our little mini-series on AI, and I speak with Dr. Anthony Murphy, Associate Professor of Forensic and Applied Psychology at the University of Birmingham. We discussed a critical topic, the governance of artificial intelligence. We explore whether AI governance is necessary and in which fields, how it could be implemented, and which bodies should be responsible for governing the vast array of companies operating in the AI landscape. Dr. Murphy brings a unique and engaging perspective, combining his expertise in psychology with a keen understanding of the ethical dimensions of technology. It's a riveting listen, so please enjoy Dr. Anthony Murphy. Dr. Anthony Murphy, welcome to the DME podcast. Thanks for agreeing to do this.
Thanks, pleasure. Thanks for having me, sir.
Yeah, so the reason I kind of asked you to come on was I think I saw one of your recent talks at the events in Birmingham. I kind of was listening to a range of AI talks, and we're kind of doing a little mini-series on AI and what it means. And I kind of heard your little brief talk about AI and regulation. And my own biases are towards free markets and a little bit of anarcho-capitalism. So I thought, regulation and AI, I wonder how those two fit together. So I thought, it'd be nice to reach out and kind of get your opinion on it, really. So do you want to mind just give us a couple of seconds on your background and how you come to talking about AI and the governance of AI?
Sure, yeah. It's a bit of a meandering route because I'm not by any means an expert in AI or in regulation. By background, I'm a kind of researcher in forensic psychology and an academic. I'm an associate professor of forensic and applied psychology. But through my time, I previously worked in the UAE, and during my time in Dubai, I got exposed to the Minister for Artificial Intelligence and a lot of the pioneering works that they're doing over there to try to really propagate the utility of AI at a societal level, but also play a kind of leading role in trying to understand what global regulation efforts are necessary and what they need to look like in order to ensure the kind of ethical and kind of well-grounded utility of AI and how it can be incorporated into daily life in a very, I guess, human enabling way.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of got involved from a kind of understanding barriers to engagement from a psychological perspective, also how it's used, in daily life by researchers and by organizations like the NHS or, any other number of organizations, how they're using it, under what circumstances, and how to enhance that from a human enabling perspective. Really. So yeah, a bit of a meandering route, but here I am, and the opportunity to talk about how AI is used in criminal justice processes and settings and contexts came up, as you mentioned, down at the exchange in Birmingham, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of flip that on its head, because as researchers, we're often thinking about how we can use it to do our research, or we can incorporate it into our research practice. And I thought it'd be interesting to add a spin to that and just say, hang on a moment, right? There's this thing going on that we are using and we know has many benefits and many utilities, but what do we actually know about how we can and should be using it, and how that is a function of a number of different organizations playing a role in saying, this is okay, this isn't okay. And I think from a public perspective, all the naive consumer thinks of a few very limited things when they think about AI. They think about large language models like ChatGPT. They think, oh shit, it's coming from my job. Or they think it's used for deep faking stars for, illicit purposes. And that creates an ill-informed fear about it. But it's also grounded in the fact that there are bad actors.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like, criminal justice agencies globally, or even, the World Anti-Doping Agency, right? They're one step behind the people who see an opportunity to use something for illicit purposes.
Yeah.
And so, understanding that negotiation is something that I find quite interesting. So that's kind of my background, and definitely not a technologist, definitely not an AI expert, and definitely not a regulation expert, but somehow found myself planted into this space, and worked on a roundtable at the World Government Summit in February with world leading thinkers and technologists in this space, and I was I didn't know whether to be awestruck or not, because there are these people that everybody else worships. I'm like, I've never heard of it because I'm not in the field.
Yeah, sure.
But then I kind of got a sense of the fact that, oh yeah, that person is like the leading, Jan LeCun, like you look at his Google Scholar profile and there's 250,000 citations and you think, okay, that's the guy. So yeah, I'm kind of learning on the hoof quite a bit. But yeah, it's just interesting from a psychological perspective, that the pace of development and how people understand that and conceptualize it and think of it as a threat, and how you kind of inform that.
Yeah, I think it's a pace of change. It's been with us, 18 months until the ChatGPT went to the public?
Well, I mean, it's been with us for 60 years, right? It's been part of our ongoing discussions for 60 years, but I think the propagation of its use cases has really kind of heightened in the last 18 months with the explosion of ChatGPT. And, going back to that bad actors and illicit things, like the immediate discussion around ChatGPT, certainly in academia, is how do we prevent students using it, right? So it goes back to the idea that, I agree, kind of in making sure that we don't overburden things with regulation, but at the same time, the immediate use cases that hit us in academia, like, okay, so we as institutions and as organizations and as a sector need to think about this, not only from an opportunities perspective, but also from a threats perspective, to the integrity of what we do.
So at that World Summit, what were some of the key conversations that were going on from a psychological perspective? How did you kind of contribute to that and give a different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of discussions, really. Certainly, the main focus of the summit itself was, or the kind of AI portion of the summit, was how we can develop and contribute towards a future of responsible use of AI, and ensuring that it is adopted in a way that is human enabling, and how that, given that it's not a geographically bound phenomenon, creates a regulatory need, because it's plug and a wall. It's 4G, it's 5G, it's VPN, it's Wi-Fi. It's something that one can engage in without needing to be geographically bound. And so the idea of a World Government Summit being the opportunity to discuss this as a necessary investment of time for responsible governance just became, it seemed like a logical place for that discussion to take place. And I was part of a team of colleagues who facilitated this roundtable on the responsible application of AI and how that needs to be built in as early as possible, because the pace of change is so quick, and you can rapidly get lost, and putting stuff in place at the earliest point possible will help to just frame the next step.
So what's the aims of kind of governing AI? Is it, as you said, is it to combat the threat elements of it, or is it to kind of understand a little bit more about what's actually going on and what the potential threats are further down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think that fundamentally it's got to be about ensuring that these technologies that are quite opaque to the end consumer, right? Not many people know about algorithms.
No.
Not many people could tell you a huge amount from source code. No. But these are the individuals who are potentially engaging with or without knowing about it, vast amounts of data being swept up for many purposes. Yeah. And so I think the aims of regulation fundamentally are about ensuring that AI technologies are developed in a responsible, ethical, human-enabling way. And kind of the UK government approach is underpinned by like 5 core principles that are around safety, security, and robustness, transparency and explainability, fairness, accountability, and then this idea of governance, there being the opportunities for contestability and redress where there seems to be some sort of breach of any kind.
Yeah.
But I think beyond that, and slightly more maybe nebulously, I think part of it has got to be about ensure or helping enable the general public to understand and, where appropriate, to protect them from nefarious uses or from illicit uses of AI, where that's even possible.
Yeah.
And I think because it's such an important and useful technological development, the UK government has taken a kind of an approach to AI that is very much grounded in kind of pro-innovation.
Yeah.
And non-statutory cross-sector frameworks. And the risk with that is that it's subject to sector-based interpretations of that guideline, which means that it's not guaranteed that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet nationally, let alone internationally.
Well, that was my question: is how in sync is that with other Western governments? I think, well, not to mention the big powerhouses like the Chinas, the Indians, and the Russians, and everyone. Would they share the same fears on the same protection of ordinary citizens when it comes to the use of AI, or will they look to use it for their own geopolitical purposes?
Yeah, I mean, if I gave a concrete answer to that question, it would either be a lie or it'd be worth a lot of money because, it'd be a guess in some way. But, there are more than 160 different guidelines globally on AI. And it seems like unless they're all exactly aligned, there's going to be some differentiation. And I think that, it's one of those challenging things because there is no global governing body, right? There is no international decree that everybody is a signatory to that says these are the standards and this is the framework upon which we will build our AI governance. And anyone in breach of this is subject to X, Y, and Z, right? The only basis for regulation is the idea of policing and recourse, right? And if these things are in place, there has to be something done if there is a breach. And I think that again, because of the kind of pro-innovation approach, we're not yet, but we're not there yet. But it's clear that is part of the trajectory of discussions that need to be taking place.
Yeah. I think what comes into effect there is a balance of how quickly AI is moving, because 18 months ago, obviously, it was ChatGPT were the big players in the market, the early innovators, but then you've quickly got the Microsoft, the Googles, and a host of dozens of other little smaller AI companies who are launching their own large language learning models. The rate of acceleration we've seen over the last 18 months and the benefits and the use cases that have been adopted for, it's massively increased the productivity in various fields, whether you're with graphic designers, also spad a new tool to create your own content and create your own art, or in the academic world that you may be in, obviously you're seeing people obviously speed up their throughput of writing big papers, doing research, rather than going around reading a load of published works. If you can kind of query a database that gives you back the key findings of a particular data set, then fantastic.
Exactly.
But then is it worth slowing down those innovations for the sake of regulation, do you think?
I think it's a really fine balance. I mean, what we definitely do know is that regulation is inevitable, right? And boundless innovation in a space where a lot of the ingredients are opaque, again, reiterating that point, it requires decisions to be made on behalf of people, I think, because we don't all have access to the knowledge. We don't all have access to the architecture. And I think the pace of development based on, you mentioned large language models, they are really the tip of the iceberg of what AI could potentially be capable of. And the next 5 years in terms of the development of the capacity of chips, you mentioned companies that are building the LLMs as the big players. The bigger players, the people behind, the one step behind, like the chip manufacturers who are the templates of the architecture necessary to do those.
They're selling the shovels in the middle of a gold mine.
Exactly, right? I mean, NVIDIA, like in the last 10 months, has just become a completely different organization. We realized that GPUs had a more conducive architecture for the deployment of AI than CPUs, and then all of a sudden, the big GPU players are just enormous, and they're multiplied by, many times in terms of their stock value because of their position in that. And, that's why this regulation question is so difficult, because, even things like open source, if we talk about LLMs, they still create the biases. We hope that by being open source, we can make those biases transparent by having eyes on code. But even then, it's only the people who know what to look for who are the eyes on the code, therefore reinforcing the biases. So, I think requiring developers and all layers of the kind of ecosystem of AI to engage proactively with the multiple stakeholders involved, from the general public to criminal justice agencies to, dare I say, even psychologists who can help to understand the human facts involved at the end use case, are important for creating a level playing field. I think that if regulation is applied appropriately, it will be applied to everyone, so no one will be at a disadvantage. But checks and balances will be in place necessarily for everybody, so that innovation may be, slightly delayed, but it won't come at the cost of providing advantages or edges in any direction.
I think it ponders the question at what point in that supply chain of AI, whether it's the hardware side of it in terms of the chip manufacturing, or at the end use case of the content at the end that's produced, or is at what point you apply the regulation, or do you spread it equally? And go, okay, Roberts, throttle that aspect down a little bit, or insist on every AI content that's generated, you have to have a watermark on your content, so the general public or the general user isn't persuaded by a voice that they think is what they're calling them about, so hey, give me some money please, or send me some money in the bill of sticky situation, but it's actually an AI generated voice, or whether it's the people doing photoshops of others, but now they can create it just by a couple of minutes on a language model, and you don't necessarily need the skills to actually do that yourself, and you can actually put someone's face on somebody else's body, and the various practices that come with that, and it's like, do you insist you have to put a watermark that you can't just rub off with another bit of software?
I mean, it makes sense that the most straightforward approach is to engage regulatory frameworks at the use point, right? But by then the damage is done to those who are victims of it.
Sure.
And we're at this interesting inflection point where I think Taylor Swift was victim of her image being used for illicit purposes using AI, and I think the last thing you want to do is anger the Swifties. So that might be the call to arms for regulation that we need.
I haven't encouraged them personally, so that's okay.
Okay.
I mean, so I think the point where you made me think about it a little bit, rather than kind of being hesitant towards regulation based on what AI is today and what the use cases are today. But you probably got a point in 5 years down the line, what does it look like then? Is it so ubiquitous in 5 years' time that it's indistinguishable from any other human or any other type of content that's created, no matter which field that you're in, whether it's the corporate world or the creative arts, whatever it may be, in the education field, that maybe something is required is to kind of say, hang on a second, you need to understand exactly what the supply chain of this is, and what you're reading, where it's come from, and how to identify that. The other thing that AI is it's obviously fundamentally based on the data that it's received. So I think I was reading some stuff a few weeks or a couple of months ago, really, about one of the throttles on AI would be more from the free market, whereby people are using copyright laws. Say universities would use their own content, or journals would use the content of their published articles, or newspapers using the content, using copyright law to stifle not feed the beast, as it were. So the throttle and the leash on AI generation will be more cost of the data is pretty high. The licensing models that we may have to pay every time we use a New York Times article, a British Medical Journal article, for whatever it may be, it doesn't worth it. It's not worth us using that data. We'll have to go find data from elsewhere. Or that's probably another mechanism rather than regulatory framework. It's more of a business and a corporate world coming into.
Yeah, I mean the challenge with that is that we inadvertently and unknowingly give away buckets of data free anyway, right? And that as a handbrake might be useful in some sector specific ways. But if you've got a service that you use that you don't pay for, that means you're not the customer. Exactly. So the amount of data that we give away, I think, is, and not, I don't want to say that we're seduced into giving away, but we are enabled in voluntarily handing over data that we don't know how much data. Like who reads the terms and conditions of an app on their phone when they download a new app? Nobody. And how do we know what on our phone is being accessed by that app and being fed into a much larger data set for what purpose? Right? It's happening billions of times a day. And it's, and to place the onus on the consumer to manage that, I think is irresponsible.
Yeah, it's overbearing as well. I think especially as a consumer, as you're getting younger and younger, but when in your work and from a psychological perspective, it's like, okay, when teenagers are being exposed to, so they don't know any different, they don't know a world for AI-generated content, they can't tell the difference between what's AI and what's with the hand of a normal human.
Yeah.
Then it's really tricky. And then if you don't understand what's real and what isn't, and you know how no concept of it, because anything you've ever seen is still a screen.
Yeah.
We don't have any longitudinal studies on this yet, but no doubt they're being partaken, right?
Yeah, and it's there is a generation who have a vastly different digital diet to every generation that's come before them.
Yeah.
And how vulnerable they are and what they are vulnerable to is something that we need to grapple with.
Yeah. I mean, one of the examples I kind of I've quoted a few times is when my youngest, about 10 years ago or so, she was like 3 years old. And she'd been used to kind of the kid leapfrog tablets or whatever it was. And finger interaction. I thought, right, I kind of had ambitions for her to be like a coder or something. So I sat her down in front of a PC with a keyboard and mouse and a monitor. She was like getting up and was pressing the screen.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
it's not working.
The keyboard.
Yeah.
I was like, it kind of penny triggered me then. I was like, okay, the penny kind of dropped a little bit.
Yeah.
But okay, you have no concept of a keyboard and mouse, do you?
Exactly. Yeah. And what the next phase of that is, will we have mobile phones or will we just have an AI assistant?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few reviews recently of AI assistant products.
Yeah.
A couple on the market. I don't think they've had glowing reviews.
Yeah.
But it looked a little bit like Star Trek to me.
I've seen the one. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's the first generation. It's not really good. But if that's where it's going, and it is just a little pin on your shoulder or on your chest, and that's your AI system, that can obviously the camera on it and recording, and obviously the technology will improve, the AI behind it will improve, and it's like, wow. Then everyone's going to have their own AI system. Everyone is integrating with the robots, right? We'll all be in the Matrix really soon.
I mean, it's all about the data that goes in, right? I mean, we're talking about, if we use large language models as the basis of our kind of average considerations about AI, it's really low bandwidth data. There's a lot of it, but if you look at it from the context of the amount of data, relatively speaking, in the context of visual data or auditory data that a child experiences from birth to 4 or 5 years old, is nothing.
Yeah.
Like all of the written data on the internet represents nothing compared to all of the bytes of data that a human experiences in the first 5 years.
I saw something. I'm I'm not sure it was your presentation, one of the others, but
yeah,
I had a little graph on that. I was like,
yeah. So if we start to code, if we start to develop ways to incorporate and code data beyond language, and we start to really kind of codify the human experience in kind of visual input and all of that kind of stuff, then we're talking about different leaps in the use cases of AI altogether.
Yeah. There's one thing having text through with images, but then you've got video.
Every human sense, right? Touch, taste. If you can start to replicate neural networks at that level, then who knows? Who knows where we go?
That's probably a good segue into a future conversation, I think.
Yeah.
Any closing remarks on how you feel the future of AI or the psychology behind AI is going to? I think we should be looking out for.
I mean, I think it's a really exciting time, and I think that as use cases for AI get more and more consolidated, we'll start to see it become more and more useful on an everyday basis. I think regulation is important. I think a globalized approach to regulation, because this is a cross-border issue, I think is important. I don't know how we get there. And I don't know that any individual would be keen to say, I know how to crack it, because it's one of those, it's just a bit of a Rubik's Cube, really. But I think it takes a real multi-stakeholder approach, because the technologists know the stuff.
Yeah.
We need the ethicists, we need the philosophers, we need the psychologists, we need the criminal justice agencies, we need governments, we need law, we need such a multi-stakeholder approach to saying, here's how my piece fits into the broader puzzle of how we conceptualize what even regulation for this field needs to look like and what it needs to do and who it needs to do it for. And I think, like we've said, we're at that pro-innovation phase because everyone's keen to see where this can get us. But at some point, governments will start to say, hang on a moment, we need to really understand how we're protecting people from the nefarious and bad actors and the illicit uses of this, and the vulnerabilities in data and protection and all of that kind of stuff. It's an inevitable development, but it's still a really, really exciting time.
Definitely exciting. Well, Dr. Andrew Murphy, thank you for coming on the DME podcast. Look forward to doing a follow-up in a few months' time.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.